At least it was 40 minutes, not an hour, because I thought if that's an hour's gone by, that's gone really quickly.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Future We Build. My guest today is Carl Brooks from CBRE. He heads up sustainability for the property management business of CBRE. And I invited Carl in because I really wanted to talk to him about fundamentally how property management as a sort of discipline is having to react to the increased requirements placed upon property managers to deliver sustainability. And we talk about the challenges for the property management model, particularly in light of the increased requirements placed upon them by investors and by real estate landlords to deliver more sustainability expertise, more sustainability capabilities. So we talk about that, we get into the detail of what does that mean for skills, tools, structure of the business model, and how we can move property management from a risk and sort of reporting function into a value creation opportunity. Let's get into it. I'm here with Carl Brooks of CBRE. Thank you, Carl, for joining me. Really appreciate coming on. As I was just chatting to you then, I was really keen when I was thinking about this first season about the story I wanted to tell and about, this challenge, I guess, this shared challenge that anyone with the word sustainability in their job title is kind of, we're all on the same journey towards these big challenges that we have to solve. And we're trying to find ways to sort of navigate that and deliver those solutions, in a big way or small way, wherever we can within the context of our job. And in the context of real estate, and certainly, institutional real estate, and obviously I come from a institutional investor where the responsibility of outsourcing the day-to-day management of the buildings is given to someone else, right? Yeah. And that is then the property manager, and then they're in another sort of follow on to that is then maybe even the facilities is then managed by someone else, and so there is this just value chain, supply chain, and the sort of fragmentation of it, and therefore the disconnect or the perceived disconnect between what's happening in the building, the decision making and, the day-to-day decision making that's happening in the building or the buildings or portfolios, back to ultimately, those that are making the strategic decisions. And so I was quite keen to, have you on and talk about, I think an organization as large as CBRE, as big as team, and I'd be curious to get actually quantum of scale in terms of CBRE, in terms of certainly the whole thing, but also PM. But just, how, and your role, which I'll get you to, officially, introduce yourself, but your role is sort of leading that PM piece from a sustainability perspective. So I was really keen to just sort of get into the detail, because having, I guess, been in the role at LaSalle, being able to sort of say, well, this is what we want from our PM. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say that, and it's easy to write that into a contract. How do you actually deliver it? So that was the sort of key reasoning for getting you on. So before we go any further, be helpful just for the listeners, who you are, kind of a little quick sort of run through, I guess, of your journey to the point where where you now find yourself, and kind of, I guess, a sort of summary of, I guess, what your job is now.
Of course. I've been working in sustainability for my whole career. So I studied environmental science at university, majored in human and the built environment, always been fascinated by sort of our interaction with the environment and how we've kind of organized and structured the environment to meet our needs. So when I entered the world of work back in 1999 or so, it was a bit of a kind of coming back down to earth with a bit of a bump that the industry at large didn't really sort of think about sustainability in the way that we were thinking about it. And a lot of the roles that were available were very much around kind of regulatory compliance. Waste management was king at the time.
Or a teacher.
Or a geography teacher, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I spent my fair share of time in Tyvek suits, digging around in bins, doing sort of kind of recycling surveys and things, and then moved into consultancy at a time when like even a lot of big blue chip companies were outsourcing their sustainability functions to third-party consultancies. So they had great clients, but we were a very small company of about 7 people, kind of in an office on the South Bank, but working with the likes of Diageo and Nike and those kinds of clients. And then just been incredibly fortunate to kind of grow up, I guess, with the industry. Moving into real estate about 18 years ago, primarily initially with Hammerson under Paul Edwards, who I'm sure you have come across in your career as well. And then from Hammerson, as a developer, operator, manager of properties, very much kind of focused on the sort of operational real estate side, looking at the objectives we'd set ourselves as a business and working out how we actually apply those objectives to the buildings that we own, office and retail.
They were definitely a sort of first mover in the space, certainly on the retail side, yeah.
And that's definitely been, an advantage of being around for such a long time, is that each role I've had has kind of been the first mover of that company. So kind of going in and saying, right, here's what we need to do. How do we do it? We know we need to do this. How do we set it up? Yeah. And actually, even moving from my previous role into CBRE, it was the first sort of embedded, decentralised sustainability function within the business. They've been very reliant on their sustainability consultancy teams, both on the advisory and the GWS side of the business. But I think what we were seeing in the industry, and my experience definitely from being at MAPP previously, was that clients were increasingly asking more of their property managers, understanding that it was the property management teams who are the ones who are physically on site, on the building, understand every closet that has a skeleton in it, all of the challenges that there are with the structure of that property, and needing to kind of shift the responsibility for driving asset performance into the teams that were actually running those buildings day to day. So CBRE approached me to kind of come and join them, which I was a little bit kind of reticent to at first because it is the big green machine. But it was very apparent to me that with their ambition and their resources and the opportunity to come in and build something from scratch in a company of global scale was just too good an opportunity to turn down.
Yeah. Let's come back to the big green machine, because I think I want to talk about the integration of, obviously my background being on the main competitor, JLL.
Sure.
But similar kind of challenges around like, how do you bring some of these separate parts of the business together when the client, all they see is CBRE or all they see is JLL or whomever it is, and they just, maybe rightly assume, oh, hold on, you're all connected and, I get one service from you and I want to get these different things. Whereas obviously, as you know, full well, I'm sure now, within these big machines, it's all very siloed and separate business lines, etc. So one of the things I want to talk about is just certainly within the context of like property management and the responsibility, as you're rightly saying, that's being sort of, and I just see an increased amount of responsibility being put on the shoulders of, or putting into the contracts of, let's just outsource the problem. It's like, well, there's sort of a tension there that, it feels like, not that it's just going to break, but something needs to change to accommodate the model to be able to then start providing that. So I guess, starting there in terms of, and you qualify this or tell me if this is not the way you see it, but and again, I can speak somewhat from experience at LaSalle where, we undertook a big program certainly in Europe to consolidate our property managers. We don't want to have to deal with, lots and lots of different, contracts. So let's have, a handful that we can be more strategic with. But certainly then layer in a lot more specific requirements around quote unquote sustainability. A lot of that was around data, but it was also, around resources, people, boots on the ground. And this is, I guess, the key point around moving just from a reporting data kind of extraction mechanism, which frankly, perhaps I get your views on this, but maybe that's what sustainability teams and property managers were sort of heavily required to do in the early years, more towards, and one of the things I was sort of keen to put into those agreements is execution. Actually, you're the guys and girls on the ground, you're able to sort of control what's going on in the building a lot more than certainly the investor can. So how do we kind of incentivize that behavior and those and the way that can work? So, my assumption is that you're seeing that increased kind of responsibility and requirements, and that's coming into contract. Curious, kind of, is that happening? Are you seeing it sort of universally, globally? Are there certain pockets where that's happening? And I guess what are the main requirements that are being set or expectations that are being set on you as the sort of PM function by, I'm guessing it's mainly the kind of institutional market that's using you. I'm just curious to kind of know, like, is that what you're seeing? Over what period, and kind of, I guess, what, specifically kind of what is that actually manifesting as?
And it would be nice if it was neat, right? And I think what we are seeing is even within markets, there is a continuum of clients who are at different sort of stages of their understanding of the of how to manage this new risk profile. And that's what it is. It's a risk management exercise ultimately. And we're seeing differences within markets, certainly between markets. My remit is global now, and there's a huge sort of difference in maturity between different markets, which does mean that we have to sort of be flexible enough to have a product that can meet clients where they are, but also to be kind of able to sort of resonate with markets who are maybe still more nascent than other more kind of mature markets. It's no surprise that the European markets tend to be more the kind of like further down that kind of maturity curve. But we are still seeing interest in other markets, particularly where there are sort of clients who understand that there is a risk around this, but don't have the resources to sort of really dig into what that risk is. They maybe look to their immediate supply chain to help sort of demystify some of the confusion around what sustainability means to them. But what we're tending to find, I mean, you mentioned data. It's amazing to me that data is still such a challenge, and it absolutely is. The wider market doesn't support great data. People are still very protective over their data. The suppliers don't really want to give data unless you have all the mandates and all the ironclad agreements to do so. But that's ultimately what kind of drives us towards performance. So we're generally seeing, I guess, 3 sort of contractual inclusions. One being nothing at all. One being to provide us with sustainability data, but with no real sort of, definition as to what that actually means. And then others who are increasingly tasking us to actively push performance of the property, improve NOI at the asset, and really sort of seeing that as part of our kind of operational duty of care, I guess. And the trick for us is to make sure we're catching those clauses during the RFP phase so we can put the appropriate resources that meet the requirement of that particular client.
And can I just ask, if you can, globally, is that 30, 30, 30 in those 3 buckets? How does it sort of split?
Well, I would probably say if I look at our properties we manage globally, so CBRE globally, we manage 19,000 buildings, 3.2 billion square feet across 41 different countries.
Quite a lot.
Right? So yeah, it's a huge amount. Around 50% of those properties will be FRI or triple net buildings. So our involvement in those is minimal because we don't really manage the building. That tends to fall within the occupier's kind of remit. But then of the remainder, when we look at our client profile, our strategic clients are responsible for around 20 to 25% of that portfolio.
Okay.
And it's generally our strategic clients who are the big institutional investors, the REITs, the large companies, the household names who have sustainability objectives and ambitions. There are smaller clients that have as well, but it tends to be in that sort of portion.
About a third.
I would say.
And is that weighting similar in Europe? Because that's what I was going to ask you, is 30, 30, 30, or if it is globally, whether that weighting would shift into Europe?
A lot of those clients are global clients.
Right. Okay.
So there will be some more advanced kind of clients in market. So some who are, European only or European and APAC. Yeah. But most of that cohort would be kind of global clients.
And so then sort of sticking with, because, and again, I had Abby on from Nuveen and we were talking about this in terms of first issue, you mentioned data as well. So I think myself
so boring.
Anyway. But in terms of that point around, it's a different way of sort of saying the same point, which she was alluding to, which is, the sort of top tier institutional stock controlled by, top tier top tier players, probably got heads of sustainability or a team of, they're members of UK GPC or BBP or whatever, and they're all sat around a table, they're all talking, they're all sharing, and, and the market, and that part of the market is moving. And it's like, well, what about the 60, 70, 80% of the built environment that's not controlled by that institutional stock? And like, how do we bring that remaining portfolio up to, because frankly, to use the thing, the planet doesn't care which building owns, who owns which building. So given that you do have, I guess, exposure to, and I fully accept, FRIs is a real tough nut to crack, but in a way, I guess CBRE, and this plays to the point I was saying earlier about like, through your kind of occupier focused business, I guess that's a different way of approaching the tenant through that FRI.
It can be, but then the occupier business, I tend to have the occupier as their clients. They tend to be the Amazons, the Googles, who have like large facilities. Whereas I guess on the investor side where I sit, the occupiers, it's more of a leasing transaction. So it's a multi-let building, there's several occupiers in there, which then throws up its own challenge, because if you're trying to push a change agenda in a building with 6 tenants and only 4 agree, then you have those 2 who are really sort of sticking, digging their heels in and not wanting to see any impact on service charge to make improvements which ultimately reduce operating costs and reduce their cost of occupancy. So it's a different set of challenges. There are, of course, some parallels between what we do and what the occupier business does, but there are sort of some significant differences.
So sticking, I guess, with that sort of 30% institutional stock, they're expecting or asking you as the property manager, we want more. What do they want more of? Like, what does that look like? And what are you having to do to respond to that? Whether that's skill sets, resources, teams, tools, structure, like how is CBRE A, what is it that's being asked of you? And B, I guess, what's the sort of transition you're going through, and kind of where do you think that's going to take you?
Yeah. And definitely worth pointing out that there are a number of clients in our long tail who are fully like on board with sustainability. They understand that there's a real sort of kind of a value driver here for them as well. So,
and that's a great advantage to them to use you, right? Because if they can borrow
that's the idea. Yeah. And so like in the UK, I think 50% of our portfolio in the UK would be sort of receiving our sort of property management specialists sustainability services. Okay. That's where we do go the extra mile to take the data, develop the insights, and translate that into action.
So at the moment, sorry to interrupt, but at the moment, that's then considered an extra. Yeah.
Well, it's generally contracted.
Yeah.
So about half of our portfolio are contracting us for those services. Yeah. But then there are some clients who will look at what we're doing around data collection and the insights we can develop for them. And they will issue variations to our management agreements to include those for the remainder of our contract.
Okay. Yeah. Because I guess where I was going with that is that, and again, I certainly from my experience, this is how it was. Is that obviously you have to put stuff in there. You have to it has to be recompensed. There has to be incentives, etc. All of that. But I guess is that just sort of the start to that's going to become normal. That's just the way that property management is going to be delivered. And so I'm just curious in terms of, like, as I say, come back to you, like, what is it that's actually being asked of you? And I guess, in your view, kind of, you're mobilizing to deliver that now. What do you see the role of the PM being like over the next 3, 5, 10 years? Yeah,
and I definitely see there being more pressure being put on property managers to perform these services. In fact, when I left Hammerson to join MAPP, I spoke to Chris Botton at the time at the BBP and said, the one working group you're missing is a managing agents working group. So we sort of convened a group, Abigail, myself, others were kind of in that sort of first kind of cohort there, which has now become the Managing Agents Partnership. And one of the first projects we did as a group there was to look at, what could investor clients reasonably expect their property managers to be able to deliver, which became the core provisions document. And that's really a bit of a blueprint for any property manager to say, okay, if we want to work with some of these large investor clients, or even any investor client that has a sustainability agenda, we will need to ensure we're able to respond or meet these requirements. And that can either be through insourcing that resource within their own businesses, or partnering with outside parties, be they their own supply chain. So their own M&E providers, cleaning providers, to focus on a specific aspect of that. But generally what we're seeing is that most of those organizations have teams of varying sizes to deliver those services. And I think their membership's now up to over 20 now, from around sort of 5 or 6 when we first started.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, in a funny sort of way, and I just as you're speaking in the BBP, and sort of call out for them, because I think it's a great example of, as you say, the sort of convening of those that are feeling the pressure right now and having to sort of come up with solutions, coming up with blueprints. And I know this is what, and we had Sarah on as a guest, like, the sort of whole, I guess, model of the BBP is to come up with like practical toolkits that are then free to use, right? So then that sort of long tail that we talked about is, if you're out there and you're sort of thinking about, what does this mean for me? Like, what does property management 2.0 look like? Actually, that's a great place to go to get resources from, as you say, from those that have been in positions of, well, we have to solve this because the client's asking for it, to come up with something. So in terms of then just drilling into that, in terms of then like the skill set and the things that you're having to do differently, like what like who are you having to recruit into your team? Like what is it? What does the team now look like? What does the service, that sort of specialist service, actually look like?
Sure. So again, there's a bit of if we take the UK, as we're in the UK, as I guess like the first mover, when I joined CBRE, it was in a UK focused role, and that was really the sort of form the blueprint for what we're now delivering globally. But within that team, headed up by James Pay, who's been in that role since I changed in 2022, he has a team of 10 now working for him. There's a sort of platform administrator role whose job it is to ensure that everything we are managing is in our data platform. We went very early on deciding that whoever controls the data controls the sort of power to develop the insights. So that's really formed the basis and the really cornerstone of our global strategy now.
Do you partner with DeepKey? Right?
We partnered, So we procured DeepKey as a provider to the UK business back in 2020, and then we entered into a global partnership with them in 2023.
Okay.
So they are our data intelligence platform globally for CBRE PM, and then we've been exploring how we leverage that platform more widely across the organisation. And that was really, without getting too into the detail, that was really to solve a very real problem that we had in the PM space, where each of our clients had their own platform, and the expectation was that we provided data to them. And the way our teams are structured, you may have individuals working in property management functions across 3 or 4 different clients. Now, if each of those 3 or 4 different clients operated a different platform, these guys are spending a disproportionate amount of their time trying to learn and keep up with how those platforms operate. So we said, actually, if we can standardize how we approach data collection across our entire platform, that means it builds like resilience into our business, because if teams change or move around, then they know what the process is. And then we can use the platform to then feed the data either directly or through bespoke exports into the format that Measurable need or Busy needs or whatever the other system needs. So that's the platform that we have, and that requires maintenance. We have a churn in our portfolio, as all property managers do, so we need to make sure the right buildings are in there at the right time. Then we have a team which I guess who are leveraging that data to demonstrate to specific clients who are retaining us to deliver the services how our management is contributing towards the achievement of their objectives. Some of those clients will set us KPIs, and they could be KPIs around data completeness, around EPC compliance, around progression of actions in our action trackers, these sorts of things. So they're all very much aimed at, meeting their reporting requirements, meeting compliance requirements, and demonstrably driving forward asset improvements, right? And as part of that process, they have relationships with the asset managers of the funds that we're managing, and they will contribute to business planning. They will advise on maybe where more focus is required in the following year. They'll work with our technical teams to understand the PPM plans or the plant lifecycle plans to identify what may be in need of replacement over the next horizon, and then what we could potentially bring forward and leverage sooner to realize savings quicker and this sort of thing. So I kind of describe that team as the kind of bridge between the client's strategy and the operational delivery. They're almost interpreting and translating what the client wants us to do into an operational setting, and then working really closely with the teams running the buildings day to day to ensure that they understand how to use the platform, understand and progress the actions that they need to, packaging it all up and then feeding that back up to the client. So they're that sort of, I guess, the center of the hourglass where everything sort of flows through them up and downstream.
Okay. So it's still, I guess, by the sounds of it, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it's still, there's obviously an element of clearly a lot of data skill sets in there. And I guess managing platforms and that kind of whole administration around it. And then there's the sort of insights side of it, which I guess historically, and again, I can sort of, think about that from a JLL context as well. It was, some of that was provided by the sort of consulting businesses that, as you say, is now sort of, well, we just now want that wrapped into our property management agreement. So I guess it's one example of where we've seen that shift from as you say, kind of something as a sort of standalone procured service. It's maybe now still procured, but it's procured a point of entry of, well, this is where we need that intelligence, rather than, because otherwise, as you say, from that, just the sort of flow of information, if you're an asset manager or portfolio manager, you want that all sort of coming through one channel, rather than having to sort of, you're the one having to kind of figure out, okay, well, how do I kind of piece these things together?
Well, it's the power of the platforms too, because, as you'll know from, kind of the various panels we've been on, and just like all the discussions we're having around the analytics platforms that we have, is there's a lot of analysis that we can do that can keep the buildings we're managing in a sort of constant state of triage, and then flagging any sort of areas which need further attention. And those modules are getting more and more sophisticated. It's going beyond just looking at kind of benchmarks and comparing that building against its cohort. We can now run, virtual retrofit plans. We can now look at, climate risk adaptation measures for those areas. We can now look at a whole sort of range of indicators, which would, as you said, would have always been the preserve of a technical consultancy. Whereas actually, if we can triage at scale and then highlight to a client where their significant risk or opportunity is in their portfolio, then we can make recommendations to still do that technical assessment, but where we've identified that there is a need. So we can say, look, the AI is telling us this. We think that's probably, with an 80% confidence, but come and talk to us and our teams over here who can drill into that.
So
refine it.
This sort of touches on, I guess, sort of moving the conversation forward around like, the sort of model of property. I guess being blunt around it, property management is often something which is, okay, how do we outsource this? It's something that we don't, I'm speaking from the context of the investor here, right? It's a problem that we don't have to manage ourselves. Let's outsource it.
Sure.
Often it's, pushed in terms of like margin. It's considered sort of low fee. And that causes all sorts of challenges in terms of the delivery. And I've seen this both in the context of JLL and a lot of my time at JLL, certainly in the innovation role, but also in sustainability roles, was working with the PMs because it was such a key touch point. It's probably the biggest touch point that we had with clients day to day, speaking to them day to day, speaking to their buildings and the people in the buildings day to day. And it was such a key touch point. And yet it was one of the toughest places to get sort of movement, because there was just, we're so constrained with margin. And then you flip it around to the client, and again, I've been in that seat where it's like, well, how do we expect them to deliver more when there's this model of like, squish it down? And I guess even beyond that, right? And often, I guess, I'm curious to know how it's contracted by you guys, but often the property management and the facilities management often comes together as a package, but is instructed, and the PM kind of takes responsibility for that. So then, you're taking margin out of that as well, and it's like, how do you kind of get incentivize the guys and girls in the building, managing the HVAC systems, managing the building, speaking to the tenants daily, which is it's so valuable. And people might not think about it, or an investor might not think about it as valuable as, when it's one person in one building. But when you aggregate it up, that whole machine that is at work for you is, the difference between your building performing well and not performing well, and could be the difference between achieving CREM, or it could be the difference between achieving, whatever metrics you've set. But it's getting that line of sight from, the investor, the objectives, the targets, and even up to their clients and the investors that are giving them their mandate, through to how am I incentivizing the people on the ground and giving them the tools, resources, and ultimately that incentive to go, whether it's above and beyond, but at least changing behaviors. Fundamentally, I guess is what it's about, or learning new skills, or learning to do things differently. I'm just curious, kind of how are you facilitating that? If indeed you are, or is that still like the biggest challenge that you?
No, well, I mean, to be honest, I think the kind of the smallest challenge is actually how to get the people working at the buildings to care, because they are the ones who probably care the most about the building as a physical asset, right? So I think particularly like when we go off and do, kind of study tours or visits to, to buildings, I'm blown away every time by just the depth of knowledge and the genuine sort of care that our teams take over all aspects of their building, and they want their building to be the best building in that class, in that city. So I think that's probably like almost like the least of our worries. the challenge is, how do we give them the right level of support, and how do we have ensure the visibility over the good work they're doing to feed that back to our clients, because a lot of it goes completely unnoticed and unrewarded.
Championing it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think you're right. I mean, there are challenges, of course, within property management. We are famously a low margin, pressured business. There's value engineering throughout every negotiation. It's a classic thing, right? We want you to do 20% more for 10% less, and that's like every recontracting seems to go kind of through that.
Takes you to a certain point where it's
absolutely. And but as a service provider, we have a responsibility for our own industry to manage expectations around that, and say, well, actually, we can't do that additional work, because actually what these are specialisms. So the way we've approached that is we've looked at all of the elements that which we would see as being the kind of core traditional sort of property management model. And yes, you're right, PM and FM tends to be bundled together, but then we outsource the hard and soft services.
Okay.
So the FM function isn't delivering M&E or cleaning, but they're managing the contractors who are. Mm-hmm. So there's a question there, and we talked a lot, with people like Debbie Hobbs and Mark Tyson around, how we change the way we contract with our supply chain to almost, incentivize them to push building performance on, as opposed to it being completely the preserve of the property manager or the FM.
So, because you mentioned a couple of names there, and I think it's interesting with what they're doing is kind of, and I want to touch on this and make sure we've got time for this. Is right. Do you see a model of emerging where, because people talk about PM 2.0, like what's the new model? Is there a new way of doing this? I'm just curious, like, do you see a kind of, obviously there's within the existing model, it's, well, we can't do that. That's the fee, we can't do it.
Yeah.
Or is there a different way of thinking about it, which is we just completely restructure this whole agreement and we share in the benefit, or I don't know, I'm just curious, are you seeing different models emerge, or are you seeing ways in which technology or AI, dare I say it, or we've sort of talked about the kind of data piece underpinning the insights, so maybe there's new workflows emerging. I'm just curious in terms of it, is there a new model emerging where it's not just the sort of standard, here's a body of work over 3 years, guess how much you think it's going to cost, put in a number and then hope that it comes off, at the end of it. Are you seeing a new way, or is CBRE looking at or experimenting with, new ways of looking at all of it or some part of it? Because often, we sort of see or hear, and it just seems to me that PM, particularly given the challenges you say, is kind of ripe for a new way of working. There's so much tension there. It seems like it's ripe for a new way of working, and it could be so much more value accretive.
Sure.
If it's done in a different way than it just being give me the data, risk, that seems to be where it's and I fear that's where it'll end up if it just keeps getting like squished, rather than it being, well, hold on, let's just completely flip this on the head. We can manage your buildings better through a different way of approaching it. Maybe we share in the benefit of that. I don't know, but
we have been through a degree of that change already. I mean, I think if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I think the kind of role of the property manager would be viewed far more negatively in the industry as it is today.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I think the change was already happening pre-COVID, but I think COVID was a bit of a watershed moment for our industry, where property owners really sort of understood, oh, actually, these are the guys that literally are keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open, keeping everything sort of functioning. And that sort of brought us a bit more kind of bandwidth to have conversations around, yes, this is the stuff we've always done, but now you just understood what happens doesn't happen. But I think the industry is shifting, but there's also a slow realization, I think, amongst our clients of the importance of that role, because strategy is nothing without action, and the delivery sits at the asset level. And there's two ways you approach that. You either centralize the delivery and you centralize the kind of the ideas generation, and you implement that centrally with no involvement or engagement with the property teams, and it's not commissioned properly, they don't know how to use it, the team changes, there's no training, and we reopen up that performance gap, which we all know exists, and it still exists today. Or you engage with the teams who really understand how the building behaves, how it should be occupied, where the pinch points are, pressure points are, and sort of fold them into part of the solutioning process, which means that when the systems are implemented, it becomes part of the standard operating procedure for that building.
Yeah.
So it's the age-old story that you have to involve the people who are ultimately responsible for the performance of that asset. And we see across the spectrum of the buildings that we manage, we see all approaches. And if a client wants to go a certain way, that is their prerogative, it's their investment, it's their building. They can go whichever way they want. But what we're seeing, or what we're hoping for as we move forward, is we'll see that contracting piece with us to take a more active role in the performance of the building over time as being a more normalised part of what we do.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, again, just there's so many parallels with the roles I had at JLL and kind of both sustainability and kind of like trying to innovate things differently. But the promise of being able to package up both, well, I guess the existing kind of service outcomes or service requirements that you have as a PM with then all those kind of other consulting, technical or other, which all sit within the big green machine, as you mentioned earlier. So there's actually a huge opportunity for those organizations that have that breadth to combine it all and offer that, which I'm, by your reaction, tell that this is something that you sort of, and I, likewise at JLL, it was like, how do we get all these aligned to offer the client that, that value? But I know that sometimes these organizations kind of, get in their own way for the right reasons or for maybe the wrong reasons, I don't know. But I realize and I understand that there are these challenges around that, but it as you're highlighting these skill sets or these requirements, they exist, they're already there. It's just packaging them up in a way that the client then doesn't have to have 5 consultants sat there, 5 different RFPs or 5 different contracts. And actually it's all delivered seamlessly, and ideally as well, it could be delivered in a way which adds value. And therefore it makes that decision of, well, this is not just loaded on new costs. There's actually a genuine partnership here to deliver better buildings. So I just, for me, that's got to be, and I think, CB, JLLs and a few others, that they've got such an opportunity to kind of get that right, to become genuine partners to the industry about, delivering that change.
I think that improvement has been happening over the last few years. We have a number of examples.
It's easy to say, I know.
But we have a number of examples where the property management team have been working incredibly closely with our sort of consulting team to deliver that approach. And actually that's informed, and kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we are now taking a kind of an end-to-end approach with our investor clients. We created a new investor sustainability organization this year, new leadership. My role's moved into that. So PM is still a prime focus, but also investor solutions more broadly. And that's really just to understand that actually clients will want us to meet them wherever they're at in that journey. And we can take them from the due diligence acquisition all the way through to disposal and everything in between. And it's around understanding the client need and bringing the best of CBRE and hopefully growing those relationships over time. So that's exactly how we're thinking about it, because we understand that actually there's so much interdependency between the different bits of what we do. Whether it's the data we're producing that can then inform the insights, or the projects that are being implemented which then have to be managed on the ground. If that's all done in isolation, there's just less buy-in, right? So we just need to kind of bring the whole team, bring the firm, bring all the expertise that we have and the massive amount of data that we're sitting on, not just in sustainability, but across transactions and leasing and valuations and everything. It's a huge asset that we have.
It is. As always, we never have enough time with this, and I really wanted to talk to you about kind of innovation and tech and kind of how CBRE and property management is kind of incubating, but we might have to leave that for another session. I ask all my guests this, like a key problem that you're trying to solve right now, either you personally or your team, or you see in the industry. Is there something that sort of you mentioned data, so maybe not that one, but is there a problem or that you want there to be a solution for something, or you wish that there was a solution for something?
Wow.
Just one.
Just one. I mean, from as a purist, I would like sustainability to be the objective, which would be wonderful. I think all too often we're trying to make the solutions fit to an investment requirement, as opposed to saying, well, actually, we need to do this. Either you'll need to do it, or whoever's buying your building will need to do it. So if I could change one thing, it would be maybe, of course, the finances are important, but let's not lose track of the fact that we are meant to be hitting net zero by 2050. If not sooner, we'd probably need to accelerate that a little bit. So to kind of maybe sort of factor sustainability more into the overarching decisions.
And I'm guessing you mean a sort of more holistic sense of sustainability.
Yeah, as opposed to like, go, no go based on a 5-year payback or something, right?
So you're kind of answering my second question, which is if you could wave a magic wand, then what would it be? And I'm guessing...
Sort out data. There you go, sir.
So, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? We just keep coming back to data. And there's an entire industry that's, and I'm sure many of them will hopefully many of them will be listening, is that are trying to solve this point. And they'll hear you and go, well, I've got a solution, I'm solving it. And we know that you are, and we know that there's great solutions out there, but just the fragmented nature of real estate and the way it all kind of plugs together and, how that all is used to make sense. You need to spend time, frankly, on the inside to really understand why it's not as simple as just the building. The data comes in and the data goes out. So.
There are great solutions, but there's no silver bullet, and that's and it's it is. I'm looking forward to the day that's just a given, and not the.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you as well, because I know that I've wrote a few articles on this, sort of generally on this subject recently, and I know that you thankfully reposted it. But this point of, not only the skill set moving more strategic into kind of the operational, but then this idea of like, well, what when you think about technology and even not even technology, data or the data flow, and kind of how do you build that quote unquote stack of information and the technology that you need to get data from, I don't know, let's say the meter through to the investment committee or whatever it is, and the layers that needs to go through. And I think maybe for the last while the industry's kind of been focused on like, we just want one system that does it all. Actually, I think we're maybe starting to see a sort of divergence of that and going, well, hold on, no, there's sort of disclosure and reporting needs that we need certain level of quality of information for. And then there's sort of more real-time, analytical information that we need to make decisions. Yeah. And those two, they can be the same, but often they're not, and the time periods are not the same. And so I think we're starting to see a maturity emerge of, well, actually there's two different, maybe there's more than two, but it's being simplistic. There's kind of at least two ways of looking at that. So I don't know. You're not the first, and you won't be the last of my guests to say data. So yeah,
because the stories you tell with the data as well. I mean, I think when we think about data, we think about all of the stuff which goes into all of those disclosures and reports. But we've not really touched on social impact, biodiversity, all these other indicators where there's a whole bunch of data there. A huge part of what we do, a huge part of the S of ESG is around our sort of placemaking, customer experience kind of stuff, which is so inextricably linked.
And as you mentioned earlier, and I found this a lot, was it's not in a strategy, therefore we don't have a KPI. It's really hard to gather, so we're not gathering it. But then actually when you go and meet the people in the building, oh, you're doing this amazing stuff.
Yeah,
I'd love to find a way of capturing that and telling the client that, or telling the investor that, but it's like, well, it's a bit messy and it doesn't really structure it. And I think that's so true. And it's the nature of the business we're in, right? And as you say, it's about connecting those on the ground that are really passionate about what they're doing to, actually those that are allocating capital or deciding on strategy, and how do we kind of, well, you're in the middle. And so
orchestrating and capturing the information, capturing the value, and communicating that story to our clients, because not every initiative is available to every building. We have to flex based on the asset type, its location, the kind of the kind of tenant mix, and so on. But our teams are doing great stuff around that sort of occupier engagement piece, which ties into the social impact piece. We're linking together our ESG data collection or environmental data collection system with our occupier engagement system, so we can start to inform occupiers how they're performing versus their tenants. It starts to get them interested, starts that conversation. And
it seems so groundbreaking.
Well, we haven't cracked it yet. I'm not going to say we've done it.
It seems like such an obvious. It's obvious, isn't it? Like, give the people that are using the space the information about how the space is, and then see what happens. But inevitably, that will lead to behaviour change, because people tend to react when they see certain things. So it's for me, I think there's so much more to go in that, in your domain, and I think the things that connect to your domain, which is how are buildings run. How are we giving people that use the building the information that they need to know? How good is the space? How is the quality of the space good? All these things, all these metrics and tools, which sort of arbitrarily talked about from a reporting exercise, but actually present them to the people, the users of the space, in whichever space that might be. And I think, the sort of consequences of that will be quite profound. So I'm guessing that's got to be part, I guess, of the future of quote unquote property management, whether it's considered called property management. Who knows? But yeah.
Who knows? I think it will be for a little while, yeah.
Carl, thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. That's it for this week's episode of The Future We Build. I want to thank you so much for listening to us wherever you are. If you're navigating these same challenges, from pricing in climate risk, decarbonising buildings, or if you're scaling a new product or solution, join us on LinkedIn. Search for me, Alex Edds, or follow our official page at The Future We Build. That's where we break down these episodes further, discuss the topics and discussions, and connect you to the leaders engaged in this mission. This show and the guests I invite will be influenced by the conversations we have on LinkedIn. So if you have ideas or would like to hear the thoughts of an industry leader, let me know, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you there. You can find the show notes and full transcripts on our website. And if you found today's session valuable, please hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thank you for listening. I'm Alex Edds, and I'll see you next time.